So when I was a kid, there was this story in the Bible that actually just terrified me when I heard it. Someone had shared it with me, and I thought, oh no, that could be me. It's a story that really should be a Halloween story, and I know we're past Halloween, but we need to talk about it because today we are talking about this topic of humility. It's the last one in our 30 weeks. Can you believe it? We've been 30 weeks through this book together, and we're at the end, and humility is the last one, which seems so appropriate. Going forward, let's make sure that we don't think too highly of ourselves. We think of others better than ourselves, that kind of thing, right? So the reason I want to talk about this story that really should be a Halloween story, even though we're going to celebrate Thanksgiving today as a church, is because in order to talk about humility, we need to talk about why we need humility, this ugly thing called pride. And the story that I want to share with you is about a man who struggles with this. In fact, it's not just a man, it's a king who struggles with his own pride. In fact, he becomes the hideous sin that he cherishes. Imagine if you became the hideous sin you cherished. I mean, physically manifested that, showed that to the world. This is who I really am on the inside. It just comes out. I'm going to go ahead and do this in a storytelling way, which means I'm going to talk about Daniel 4, and when we get to the end of it, I'll go ahead and read some passages from Daniel 4, but I just want to tell the story. So the story is about a king, and his name is Nebuchadnezzar, and he was the most powerful king at that time, ruling over the Babylonian Empire, spreading the culture of the Chaldeans. He was a powerful, powerful man, and he was very, very comfortable. He's the one that conquered Jerusalem and took all those from Judah, the best and the brightest, leaving the weak and the old behind, taking the best and the brightest back to Babylon and assimilating them into his own culture. This is Nebuchadnezzar, and he was a pretty comfortable king. He had everything his heart desired. One night he went to bed, and in his peace and in his contentment and in his comfort, he slept like a baby until he had a dream. Now, it was one of those dreams that you've had before where it's just images at first, but those images, as peaceful and as beautiful as they were, somehow haunted him. He knew something was wrong. In his vision, he saw a massive tree, a tree bigger than any tree he had ever seen, a tree bigger than the palace that he lived in, a tree that reached up to the sky and touched it. Its branches were broad, and it was filled with fruit, and the leaves were beautiful on this tree. Birds nested in this tree. Underneath, animals roamed under and took shelter in this tree, enjoying the tree. And as he looked at this beautiful tree with fruit that was in season and animals infesting it, enjoying it, living in it, the sky split open, and a man came down and began to shout at the tree, "Cut it down! Cut down that tree, strip it of its leaves, scatter the animals, shoo away the birds, leave nothing, no fruit. Cut it all the way down to its stump, then bind that stump with an iron and bronze shackle. Dig up the roots and bind them with shackles as well." And all of a sudden, and you've had this in your dreams where it kind of changes. This is a tree, and all of a sudden it's being spoke to like it's a man. And it says, this messenger from heaven, "You will live like a wild animal. You will no longer think like a man. You will lose your mind. Everything will turn animalistic inside you, and you will eat like a cow in the ground. In fact, your own fingernails will begin to grow, and you'll have claws like an animal, and you'll have feathers instead of hair, and it'll be feathers all over your body. And this is how you will live for 7 years until you acknowledge who God really is. This has been decreed. This will happen." And at that moment, Nebuchadnezzar woke up, shot up in bed, sweating from the terror. He called in his advisors, his magicians, his astronomers, his astrologers. He called them all in and said, "I need to tell you this dream. It's frightened me. You need to give me an answer." And he goes through in detail every part of his dream, and none of them can answer at all what any of it means. Finally, Daniel is brought in, the Hebrew, the one who interpreted a dream for him before of a tall statue. the one who Nebuchadnezzar trusted to have the spirit of the gods in him. And so Daniel sat down as the king went through the entire story again. And Daniel, as he listened, grew perplexed, disturbed, really. Color left his face, for he was beginning to understand what this dream was really all about. And the king saw in Daniel's face the kind of terror that he felt while he was asleep. And he says, "Oh, don't worry. This prophecy, this dream, it should not scare you, Daniel." And Daniel said, "Oh, king, if only this was a prophecy for your enemies or your adversaries, if only it was for them, it would be okay. But this tree, this massive tree you saw, the tree that touches the sky, that's broader than any tree and taller than any tree and houses all these birds and all these animals and fruit for every season, this tree, this beautiful, strong tree, oh, king, it's you. That tree's you. And that messenger who came down had a prophecy for you. And he said to cut down you, O king, to scatter all those who are living off of the kingdom, the magnificent kingdom you have built. It's going to be cut all the way down to the stump. But king, listen, because the prophecy has this shackle, this iron and bronze ring around it, and the roots are all tied up as well, your kingdom will wait for you. But you're going to be driven from this palace for 7 years. You're going to go mad. You're going to lose your mind. You're going to grow fingernails like claws, and your hair's going to grow, and it's going to become like feathers, and you're going to eat grass like a cattle. Oh, king, Daniel tried to advise him, you need to repent. You need to treat those you've treated unkindly kindly. You need to somehow take the focus off of you and put it where it belongs, on God. You need to change your ways. And Nebuchadnezzar listened intently. He would do anything. After Daniel left, I imagine he didn't eat, had trouble sleeping, and waited for this to happen. I mean, the last time Daniel gave an interpretation of a dream, it happened. Now he waited. And he waited. A few days went by and nothing really happened. He decided he was going to make some amends, and tried to anyway, and tried to be nicer. It was hard. He was really used to being the sovereign king, ruler of everything, having every comfort he could ever imagine. So a week went by. The fear began to fade within him. A few weeks went by, and he continued to remember, but not fear, and eventually he even stopped remembering. Months went by, 12 to be exact. He was walking on the top of his palace, looking out over all the beautiful things that his palace had in it, the courtyards, great architecture. Babylon was beautiful. And he had done this. He had created this. He had commissioned those who built this. It was representative of his entire kingdom. And he was an emperor. He had a vast empire, the most powerful empire in the known world. And this was the crown jewel. And he couldn't help himself. He just got so excited walking around, looking at it all. And he just shouted out, "Look what I have created. Isn't it beautiful?" And even as his words came out of his mouth, it was like an echo coming right back to him. Only it wasn't his words. It was somebody from heaven saying, "It has been decreed, it shall happen. You shall be driven from the palace tonight." He ran. He ran down the steps. He ran out of the gate. He ran away from the palace and away from the city and out. And he was tearing his clothes as he did it. He couldn't keep them on him anymore. And his skin began to crawl on him, and the hairs began to grow, and feathers and claws. And he tried to cry out, but only a howl came, and he found himself on the ground. And when he woke up, he was on the ground covered in dew, just like the prophecy promised. And the next day he woke up there too, and he ate grass like the other animals in the wilderness. And he did it the next day. And the next day, without a thought other than animalistic thoughts, He was a beast. He had lost his mind. This went on for 7 years. Sometime in the 7th year, he simply looked up. And as he looked up, his mind began to clear. And he realized there's only one sovereign. There's only one ruler. There's only one king. There's only one Lord of all. There's only one. And it isn't me, he said to himself. And as he said that, he realized his hands were back to normal. His body was back to normal. There was no feathers. It was just Nebuchadnezzar in his right mind, restored. At some point, those who had been looking for him for 7 years, who had been somehow keeping the kingdom running, found him and returned him to his palace. And this man who was a beast, who ate grass, who looked up, shared some of the most amazing words you could share, especially considering this is Nebuchadnezzar, the most feared monarch in the known world. He was brutal to his enemies. He was a tyrant. He was a prideful, self-centered, arrogant man. And yet when he looked up, he realized he was nothing. And God was everything. And he said these words: His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the peoples of the earth, including me, are regarded as nothing. Nothing. He didn't blame God for turning him into a beast. He didn't try to excuse himself like it wasn't his fault or the circumstances were such. He had nothing in him prideful in this moment to draw attention away from the fact that God is sovereign. And he says, he can do this to me. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth. I don't care that he did this to me because he has every right to do this to me, he says. No one can hold back his hand or say to him, what have you done? He never pointed his finger at God. He never blamed God. He simply acknowledged, you're sovereign, I'm not. You're everything, I'm nothing. That's it. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven. And his final words, because everything he does is right and all his ways are just, and those who walk in pride he is able to humble. It was those last words in addition to the story itself that got me as a little kid. I mean, the story itself. What? Just because of a little pride? We've all had that feeling inside, right? Of, oh, this feels good, even though I know it's not right, but it feels good that I was put above that other individual. I made some snide comment, and I made myself rise and them go down, and that felt good. We've all had that feeling. We all know what pride feels like. I'm better than them. And yet, as a little guy, every time that feeling came up, now all of a sudden I'm nervous because God is able to humble those who walk in pride. Maybe it's not just that he's able to, but that he does it. That was my greatest fear, that he might want to turn me into a beast. I had things that I was very good at. Now, as a little guy, I had things I was very bad at. But you know what you do when you have pride, when you're really bad at something? You make excuses for it, don't you? But all the things that I was good at, oh man, I would make sure people knew that. Don't we do that with our pride? Hey, this is what I'm good at. Let me show you. Let me show you. One of the things as a little guy, when I was in elementary school, I was known as the artist. I was the one who drew all the pictures, and everybody wanted me to draw them pictures, and or paintings or whatever. One of the mediums that I was really good at was crayon, which sounds silly, but I could make a crayon look like a painting. a crayon drawing. And so it was just something, I just absolutely loved that. I think I loved the feeling of the girls in the class wanting artwork from me more than I enjoyed making the artwork. You know what I'm saying? So pride, we have pride. And as a little guy, I had pride. And another thing I was good at as a little guy, I was good at programming computers. I had an Atari 800. I bet you're envious. You wish you had an Atari 800 computer. Remember Ataris? Little bleeps. Well, they made computers. They made two of them, 800. That was the better of the two. And I had that, and it was one of the first computers for younger kids. And I learned to program basic computer on that, and I taught myself, and I felt pretty good about that because I could actually make video games. I was prideful. I loved that people were in awe that I could make things on the TV actually look like video games. That was cool to me. Oh, another thing that I was good at, I was an amazing athlete. Absolutely amazing athlete. I'm glad nobody left. That, of course, was in my daydreams, and they were really good daydreams, and you should have seen my half court at the buzzer shots in basketball. That's my most frequent daydream. That's the one I wish I was good at but wasn't. But we all have pride, don't we? We all have this thing that, hey, I'm better than someone else at something, if not some of us at everything. We were very competitive in our house. We played games all the time. Board games was big, and we would play from Risk, Monopoly, you name it, we played it. Sorry, and I never was sorry that I sent them back home, even though the game says sorry. Oh, we'd say, sorry, got you, sorry. And my sister would say back to me, you can't say sorry unless you really mean it. Oh, Jody, I'm sorry that I said that. This is how competitive we were. And, when you lost, you made excuses. When you won, you gloated. And then someone told me this story about Nebuchadnezzar turning into a beast. And all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, that feeling that feels so good just for a moment now is scaring me because I think I'm going to turn into a beast. Or if I don't turn into a beast, God wants to turn me into a beast, right? He wants to change me. And so I was scared. And here's the deal, and you know this is true. Pride is not something just little boys have trouble with, right? We all have trouble with pride. We all want to be better than somebody else. Okay, I don't want you to raise your hand, but if we were going to raise hands, I'm going to imagine that this place would just be filled with hands. How many of you, no, don't do it, okay? But just imagine. How many of you, when you go to Walmart, have at least at one point in your trip to Walmart say, I'm glad I'm not that person? Right? We are prideful, all of us. And here's what I have learned over the years. I've learned that fear is not a great motivator to keep pride away. I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but maybe you heard this story when you were younger, or maybe you just heard it now and you're thinking, oh, that's a good story to know, because if that really happened, and I believe it really happened, it's in the Bible. Nebuchadnezzar is confirmed as a Babylonian king, and it really happened. I trust the Bible. And if you believe it really happened, then maybe you have a little bit of fear going, oh, now that's going to help me, because when I get prideful and I think I'm the best and I want to be better than, and I think better of myself than I think of others, I need a little fear. Well, here's the deal. It's been many years since I've been a little guy. Many, many, many years. And I still struggle with pride. If fear was going to cure me, that story should have cured me. Because I don't even want God thinking about turning me into, even if he doesn't turn me into beast, I don't even want him to think about it. I don't want to embody the very sin I cherish. And yet fear is not a great motivator. We've all heard this passage or passages in Proverbs like it. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. We shorten that to pride goes before a fall. Excuse me, we know this. And we recognize that this is true. We've seen people fall all around us that have a haughty spirit. I don't even know what a haughty spirit is, but boy, it sounds good, doesn't it? Haughty. Like some haughty with my tea. I don't know what a haughty spirit is, but I know it's bad. It's prideful. It's ugly. We don't want that. And we've seen people that have been so prideful and have fallen, and they've had ruined marriages, and they've had ruined careers, and they've had ruined finances, they've had ruined health and ruined reputation. We've all seen this, and we know it's real. We know it's true. Man, we don't want this. But it's not enough to keep us from doing it, because we also fall at things too, don't we? We find ourselves, oh man, I shouldn't have been so bold, and I shouldn't have been so cocky, and I shouldn't have been so haughty. I shouldn't have been so haughty. We do this, don't we? Fear is not a great motivator. We're told the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and I believe this, and I teach this, and I wish that people understood this, that you've got to start in fear. It is beautiful when you get to that place where you recognize God is God, and I am not. He is holy, and to tremble before Him is not a bad thing. To say, He could turn me into a beast for what I've done. That's a good thing. That's a great place to start, but it's only the beginning of wisdom. Because even Nebuchadnezzar, in the great dream that he had, and it was a great dream. I know it terrified him, but it was a great dream. Who wouldn't want a dream like that to warn you ahead of time? Don't do it. Wouldn't you want that before you made the biggest mistake in your life, to have a dream that scares your socks off? Come on, you want that. Don't do it. But it didn't even last, did it? Days went by, nothing happened. Weeks went by, nothing happened. Months went by, nothing happened. 12 months go by, he's totally forgotten about it. He's walking on the rooftop going, this is great, I'm good. Look what I created. He did the very thing he was warned about not doing, because fear doesn't last. Fear is the beginning. And we need to get to this place where we recognize we need to start fearing God. And if you don't fear God, you need to start fearing God. You need to read up on hell. You need to read up on His power. You need to read up on Revelation. You need to somehow get a little bit of timidity in your soul for what is coming or what God can do. But don't stop there. Because all fear is designed to do is make you look up. He could destroy me. The problem is what we do is after nothing happens, we kind of think, well, maybe I can get away with this one. I didn't get lightning this time. Maybe I can get away with this one. Oh, it didn't happen this time. Fear is a good place to start because it makes you look up. And when you look up, what's supposed to happen is what eventually happened 7 years later with Nebuchadnezzar, but it took 7 years. I hope it doesn't take 7 years for you. Fear the Lord, and when you are looking up, acknowledge something about Him, like what Nebuchadnezzar did. Say to God, He's everything, you're nothing. Admit that He is awesome, and you don't matter at all. Your life is but a vapor. You're a mist. You're only here such a short time, and whatever you've accomplished compares nothing at all with what God has created and done. When you get to that place, what happens is you begin to change. You begin to change from fearing God to glorifying God. And it's so needful to do, because when you're looking up, you've got to recognize it isn't me that created this. I didn't build this. I know we don't have an empire like he had or a palace like Nebuchadnezzar had, but we have stuff and we have accomplishments. We are able to do things. We have our own strengths. We have our own looks. We have our own abilities. We have our own talents. We have our own achievements. We have our own experience. We have our own creations. We do things that we can certainly say, isn't this good? Isn't this prideful? The reality, though, is God gives all of that. And here's what we need to realize. Each and every one of us, we don't have to be turned into a beast. God doesn't even have to do that. Our fingernails don't need to grow. Feathers don't need to grow on us. We don't need to drop on the ground and eat grass like a cattle. We don't need to lose our mind. Here's the reason why. Each and every one of us is a beast. We are compared to the perfection of God. Each and every one of us is hideous. Each and every one of us is weak. Each and every one of us is unglorified compared to the glory of God. And when we recognize that and we get that it's not about God and us trying to impress Him, but it's about God and us being infused with Him, or have Him live in us, or have His very qualities live through us, those are the things we can take pride in, and that is different than self-esteem. We've got to stop teaching our kids about self-esteem. Look where it's gotten us as a country. This experiment of self-esteem has failed. What we need is God-esteem. We need God in us. We need God who is good to be in us. We need God who is love to be in us. We need God who is kind, gentle, compassionate. We need God who is self-sacrificing. God who is full of gentleness and mercy and kindness. We need God in us. And when we start living to the glory of the Father, realizing we're nothing on our own, and everything that we've been looking at and learning in this book is all about God becoming alive in us so that we really are something only because we are His. God in us. It's beautiful. It's right. And it's what needs to happen. We need to surrender all this pride. We need to start glorifying God instead of living for self. Now, I want to ask you a question. Just be honest at this point in your life. Do you fear God? Is there an ounce of fear in you? And if your answer is, yeah, I don't know if that's right or that's good. I don't know if I should have moved on by now from there. I just want to say to you, that is a great place to start. If you don't fear God, get to the place where you fear Him. And then begin to see Him for who He truly is. He is able to squash you, destroy you, ruin you, change you into a beast. His desire is to love you, to set you free, to fill you, to use you full of purpose and meaning in this world. That's a world of difference, isn't it? When you fear Him, you recognize He's sovereign and rules, and I will submit to Him. When you begin to glorify Him, you realize He is beautiful and He offers His beauty to me. He's willing to live in me. That's awesome. That's where we need to get. If you're struggling this morning with getting your eyes off of yourself, because that really is the big thing, isn't it? It's all about me, I'm better than, and I compare myself to, and when you're there, it's really hard to look up, isn't it? It's really hard to give God glory. It's hard to think about, I'm going to live this day for His glory. It really is all about Him. It's not really about me. It's really hard to get there, isn't it? Whether you have successes, whether you struggle to succeed, whether you struggle to get past failure, when you give Him credit and you give Him glory, it changes your entire outlook on life, but sometimes it's really hard to get there. Jesus tells us how to get there. And He does it very simply. How do we even begin to get our mind off of ourself? So here's the how-to. It's real simple. Jesus says, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. Whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. His answer to you? Very simple. Serve somebody. Just serve somebody. Find your place to serve. It gets you off of yourself. You're living for something bigger than yourself. The reason why the community of God, the church itself, is supposed to be so freeing for us is not just because we're there to hold each other accountable and encourage each other, but because we serve together. We do life with Jesus, in community, together, on mission, serving. And when we do those three things, our focus is where it's supposed to be. And we can properly fear God, healthy, reverent fear, and see Him for the glory that He is. And the more that we serve, the more we are able to glorify Him, because serving is how we reflect Him, how we glorify Him. All right, so there's your how-to. That's how we do it. Do you fear God? If you're struggling with that, are you serving somewhere? Do you have a place to serve in the church? And if not, come see me. I'd love to give you a job. I got a few that I could use help with. Live glorifying Him in everything you do. Think about raising your children, where you work, how you serve, glorify Him. Jesus one time told this advice, and I think it's a good way to conclude. He said, when you're giving a banquet, it's appropriate, we're having a banquet in a moment, aren't we? When you go to a banquet, don't take the best chair, don't take the best seat. Don't sit up front going, man, I'm important, I'll sit right here. He said, if you do, the host will come up to you and say, oh, I'm sorry, this is so embarrassing. That seat's reserved. We need to move you back. And you'll be humbled. He says, instead, take the worst seat. Find the seat in the corner that nobody else would dare sit at. Take the lowly seat. Then the host will see you. He'll run up to you and say, oh, what are you doing sitting there? You shouldn't sit there. Come on, I got a better seat for you. Then you will be honored. Sound familiar? Humble yourself now, and you'll be honored. Honor yourself now, or you'll be humbled. The choice is yours. But what I love about the story Jesus tells is that He lived it. He sat on the throne of heaven, the greatest kingdom of all. He ruled eternity and this domain we live in, and He stepped off of it. He removed Himself from the greatest seat, came here to serve us. In fact, He didn't even sit down. He bent down to those who were sitting and began washing their feet. He washed their feet. And sometimes when we read the story of Jesus washing feet, we see images, because sometimes the movies portray this, where He takes water and He gently pours them over the toes. I don't know about you, but if my son washed his feet that way, they would never get clean. No, I see Jesus actually really working at it to remove the caked on dirt and sand, stones. And yeah, I had to touch the jelly stuck in between the toes. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Jesus took the worst seat. In fact, He died on the cross. That is the worst possible place ever. He did that for you. He died for you. And you now can have a relationship with Him because of what He did on the cross. He humbled Himself to the very lowest position possible. And yes, God the Father exalted Him higher than any other position because of that. But that's the point. We're supposed to surrender our life here and now, humble it now, and He'll glorify it later. He calls it crowns of heaven. I don't know what even that means, but we're going to be honored somehow for the way we choose to live here and now, following after our Master. But my invitation for you this morning is for you, if you're struggling with this walk with Jesus, with this relationship with Jesus, if you don't understand what that means, if you've never surrendered your life, if you've never humbled yourself, because it requires humbling, to step forward and to say, I need Jesus, I want to invite you to do that. Jesus has already stepped forward, taken the lowest position, and loved you with the blood of His life. Now He's asking you to step forward. And so at the close of each service, we have an invitation, and this is your invitation. We're going to ask that you stand right now. I'm going to say a prayer. The team is going to sing a song. During that song, we invite you just to come. Father God, we love you so much, and we can't even imagine how humbling it must have been for Jesus to take the lowest chair. God, we ask that those that have never accepted the blood of Christ applied to their souls for eternity, that they would now humble themselves by coming forward and admitting they need Jesus. For the rest of us, we pray that you will help us to humble ourselves, to not think too highly of ourselves. If we don't fear you, to begin fearing you, If we're not serving, to begin serving. And if we're not living to glorify you, to begin living to glorify you. It's not about us. It's all about you. Father, this is our prayer. In Jesus' name. If you have a decision, come.